Is going to be looking at Wacom tablets, so using Adobe Illustrator and a Wacom tablet to create a digital illustration. This one specifically is just going to be focusing on line work, and then we're going to look at colour in the next video. So I'm going to set up a document here, so I'm going to just go for A3. You could go for portrait or landscape depending on what your design is, and I'm going to set this up as Wacom line and create. So you'll see I get my document here. Now when you're doing Wacom sort of illustration, it's always best to work from a sketch of some sort. So this might be a quick sketch you've done of a little character design or of an object or a drawing. It could obviously be typography based if you're doing your own sort of lettering and things like that. But I would advise always having a scan. Now I'm going to make this fairly big on my page here. And I'm going to find my layers and I'm going to make sure that's where I want it, and I'm going to lock that layer. So with that little box there, and add a lock, and then I'm going to work on a new layer above it. So I want that locked so that it's not moving around or doing anything, it's just there as a background layer. You can see I've got a really rough sketch here. I've sketched in some details, I've sketched in some shadowing and some shading, just to give you a really clear idea of kind of what I want going on. Now, if you've plugged your Wacom in, you should see this here, Wacom Desktop Center. You can just search it in the search bar and find it that way. And you just want to make sure that it is detecting your device here. So I've got my Wacom Intuos S here. And then you want to go to your pen settings. And then you should see this window here. So this allows me to do this for anything I work with. I tend to have this in the middle, that in the middle, and then you can see on your pen you have two buttons, so a bottom button and a top button. I tend to have my top button as a right click, I don't really use that very much, and then my bottom button is pan/scroll. Now actually that is the one that you're going to use the most, so make sure you've got that set to pan/scroll on that sort of bottom button there. So that's the first button that you sort of click on your pen. Once that's all done, we can just close that, and we can get back into here. So the first thing I'm going to be showing you is this tool here, which is the Blob Brush. So you might see the paintbrush tool, we want the Blob Brush here, and we need to set this up ready to go. So I'm going to double click that. Now I don't want keep selected ticked, I want merge only with selection ticked, and then you see we get some options here for accurate and smooth. We want it nearer smooth than accurate. You don't want it halfway. You want it sort of the last one before perfectly smooth. What that means is Illustrator does the legwork for you. So it guesses where it thinks you're going and it smooths out your lines. So they're not perfectly accurate to exactly what you've done with the pen. They're a little bit smoother, they're a little bit cleaner, and it just saves you constantly undoing and redrawing lines to get them perfect. This is where you edit the size of your brush. So this is something you might need to just figure out how big it is and come back to it. I think I'm going to go for 8 point. Now this generally will say fixed. We don't want that fixed. When you're using the Blob Brush tool, and especially when you're doing a digital illustration, you want it to have varying widths. So it's sort of thinner with less pressure and heavier with more pressure, and you want that control because it's going to give it a much better appearance. So I want to go to pressure, and then I'm going to set my variation up to full. So I want it to vary from no pressure, no size, full pressure, full width. So it's going to give me a better sort of look and feel to it basically. Everything else can stay fixed, so happy with that, and we're good to go. Now you want to be quite zoomed in, especially if you're starting this for the first time. The more confident you get, the more you might be able to zoom out. Now you can see my brush, so I've done white there. I'm going to find that, and I'm just going to go to black, and I'm just going to test it and make sure I'm happy with it, and test my pressure and test what it looks like when I do different things, and can I get full pressure. And then you want to do just have if you're right-handed, you want obviously your right hand on the pen and the left hand on Control Z. If you're left-handed, you might have to think outside the box a little bit because you still want to be able to do Control Z. So if you can move your keyboard over to your left of your computer, having Control Z or Command Z at your disposal, just ready to go, will speed up your workflow. So you always have one hand on the pen, one hand ready to Command Z undo. Obviously for right-handers this is a little bit more natural because it's on the left hand of the keyboard. Now you can see if I press that first button I get this hand icon, so that means I can just scroll and pan. So instead of drawing, I hold that button down and then I can click and drag, and that is really useful for just navigating across your document, especially when you're really zoomed in. you know, if you're at like this detail level, you're going to really need to use that. So hold that bottom button down with your index finger and just get used to panning and looking around your document. Get used to double tapping on things and opening things. Get used to right clicking with that top document, and just really get used to what's going on. So first thing we're going to do, I'm actually going to zoom out because this is a bit close for me. With the Blob Brush tool, you want to almost overlap your lines on purpose. So you can see I'm going to start here, and I'm going to start a little bit out of the way, and I want it to be quite thick at the bottom, and I'm going to come up and I'm going to zoom off. So I've overlapped that on purpose, and I'm going to do the same thing here, and I'm going to go like that, and I'm going to come off like that. Now if you're not happy with that line, just Command Z and undo, and do it again and get your pressure right and get the feel right, until it's something that you're quite happy with. But you definitely want these overlaps, so you want those to happen because it will just help you neaten things up a little bit later, and it will keep everything nice and joined up. So we really want all of these lines to be joined, so having them overlapping will give you that. Now take it as slow as you need to. Obviously if this is your first time doing this, you are going to need to go much slower and much more controlled just to get used to what's going on and how it works and how it feels and how to get comfortable with it. So you can see I'm still overlapping these lines on purpose just because it will give me a nicer look and feel when we come back to it shortly. So the more confident you get, obviously the more you can sort of go faster. I'm not doing any detail for the moment, I'm just going through the main sort of edges. So this might be the outline of your drawing, or the sort of main shapes. You really don't want to focus on any detail yet because we're going to change our pen setting and we're going to change our layers and things for that. So just focus on those main outlines, the main shapes that you've got. Remember to overlap where possible. So I'm just going to undo that because I'm not happy with that one. So Command Z, always have that ready to go. There we go. Now I'm going to leave it at that for now. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to swap to my mouse here. I'm going to zoom out a bit. And I'm going to swap to my normal tool. Now because I've got this back layer locked, that makes this a lot easier. I'm going to click and drag over the entire thing. Now you can see where these overlap. And you can see how it's created these sort of overlapping shapes. If I go to the Shape Builder tool, and if you're familiar with the Shape Builder tool, you'll understand what we're going to do next. I'm going to do Alt on my keyboard, and then I'm going to go through and delete any of those overlapping bits that I don't want. So figure out which parts of the overlap you want, which bits you don't. Now obviously that was the same selection, so I'd have to go and draw another line over that to get that one to work. And just go around and neaten it up. You might need to zoom in so that you can do this properly, but go through, get something you're happy with, and then you'll be able to see where you've not perfectly overlapped them, and how this sort of works, and you'll be able to identify what's really going on your design here. And a lot of this is just about being confident and sort of understanding what it is you're working with and how it looks and how it works. And I'm going to go back to my Blob Brush tool. I'm going to zoom into this one here because this one's not worked properly. And I'm just going to do that. And then when I select those and Shape Builder. Now if it doesn't work, you can use the eraser. So you should see here there's an eraser tool. But the eraser's not perfect and it will leave sort of janky lines. So you can see that that's not a very good line, but it does do it for you. So if you need to use the eraser, you can, but I would always advise using the Shape Builder tool if possible, where possible. Rather, you know, the eraser really should be your last resort because it's not perfect and it doesn't give you those sort of smooth, clean edges and nice sort of thickness and finish. So that's my basic outline. Now I've gone fairly thick for this because I want some contrast between the thickness of this and the detail. So now I'm going to group that. So I want that grouped, and I might even put it on its own layer. So if I start a new layer underneath that, I'm going to double click that layer and call that outline. Now for the detail, you can see I've got lots of different things going on here. Thinking about hand illustration techniques, and if you were doing this maybe with a fine liner, you'd start to think about those different techniques, linear shading, contouring, cross-contouring, cross-hatching, etc. So I'm going to go thinner with my lines. So I'm going to take this down to maybe 6 and have it on full variation again. And I'm going to go through and I'm just going to pick out where I want to add some detail. Now it doesn't have to be everywhere. You can see I've sort of already picked out these places for these details to go. Now obviously think about your angling. I'm sort of going for a cross contouring technique here, so I'm looking at where I think the angle of the surface would be, and therefore where my lines are going to go and what direction they're going to be in. Obviously skulls are quite curved, so I'm trying to change this and curve it as I go. And I'm just thinking about where is the shadow, where is it darker, where do I want those extra details in. And obviously I've got these detailed bits, so I'm going to add those in thinner, and those bits there, where I really want these curves to appear. Now that sort of differing thickness of line is really important because it creates that contrast and it creates those sort of levels, and it gives you a more 3D effect, and it looks a lot nicer when you've got different sort of tones and shading going on. Now again, if you're not happy, just Command Z and you can undo. Now I'm actually going to go through and draw the teeth in here, and I wanted these to be thinner. Obviously you've got to be careful. You can join them up if you want to, but you don't have to. It's sort of figuring out what kind of effect you want and how you want it to look. You could go through that and then add a little sort of cap on there. Totally up to you. And remember, if we overlap at any point and we want to get rid of that, you can just go through and use that shape builder tool. There we go. So those are our top sort of teeth in there. I'm going to add this little bit of detailing here. I'm going to add some shading in there. And then same here. Now remember your pressure is quite important here. So when we were doing shading before with a fine liner, you didn't necessarily have that same control over the pressure, so it wasn't as important. What we were really focusing on was sort of the distance between the lines and the angles of the lines. But we've sort of got that added control here where we've got the pressure of the lines as well to work with us. Now I'm going for a more sort of sketchy feel, so you could go for a very sort of graphicsy line effect, or you could go for a more sort of shaded effect. Totally up to you. And I'm going to leave it at that. Obviously I could do the inside of the eyes as well. I might do the inside of the eyes a little bit. Like that. Now if I zoom out, so Command minus, you can see I've got a very different effect here to the ones that I've got here. So it's about you figuring out what works for you and what they like the look of. Obviously another one that we looked at was cross-hatching or cross-contouring. So I could then go back over these if I don't like that, I feel it's too minimal, and I could add in my sort of cross-contour or cross-hatching. So you're going in the opposite direction to the lines that you've already made. And again, I'm thinking about the angle here. I'm thinking about the lines I'm choosing and where I want them to go. Now it's the same thickness because I want that consistency, so I've not changed the thickness of my line at all. Obviously I've got my pressure sensor on, so it's sort of adjusting and changing as I go. so. Now this is not going to be perfect, so you've got to sort of allow that illustrative style to come through and not worry about it being realistic, because that's not really what we're aiming for here. Obviously, if you wanted a certain style, you might look at cartoons, you might look at certain illustrators and look at how they use line and how they do their own shadows and textures. So you can see I'm going a bit more heavy here because I've gone for this sketchier style in that section. And there we go. So you can see a very different effect there with the cross hatching. Again, it's totally up to you. Now, what you might wanted to have done is lock that layer and have that on a separate layer, because you might want these as sort of separate pieces, whereas you can see now I've sort of got everything on one layer. I could obviously go through and select my sort of earlier pieces, so the original sort of line work that I did. Like so. And bring that all together, and then I could group that. Now I've got that all in one group. I could put that onto a separate layer. So you could see I could have one layer with my outline and one layer with my details. So if I just rename those. And then when I hide that, you can see we've got our original outline and then we've got our detail on there. So that's your basic line work. Obviously, depending on your the style you want to go for, I really like the Blob Brush for this. What I'm going to show you next is a different tool. So if you're going for a more sort of a less hand-drawn feel and a more sort of comic-y feel, a more vectorized feel, if I just hide these, and I'm going to lock those layers as well. So we could use the pencil tool here. So the pencil tool is that one. Now what you get with the pencil tool is slightly different. So when we had our Blob Brush tool, if I just go back and show you, it gave us a shape. So it was really useful in actually giving us a shape that we could go into and edit. And you can see this is a filled in shape. So you've got anchors on each side, so I can go and make that thicker if I wanted to, etc. And it was very much determined by the pressure of our pen and the way that we drew. If I hide that and I start on this layer and I use my pencil tool, I'm going to do 0 fill and I'm going to do a black outline, and I want a 5 points or a 6 point stroke, let's go for. So if I show you now what the pencil tool looks like, and you'll see if I double click that, again you want it smooth, we don't want keep selected, we want it to fill new pencil strokes, and everything else there is fine. If I show you what that one looks like, you can see we get a flat line. So this one isn't affected by pressure. So we get a very flat, very sort of controlled line, as though we would if we were using the pen tool and our mouse. And again, I'm going to hold my little button down so that I can scroll. So we get a very sort of non-organic, very digital, flat effect here. Now, in a minute, we're going to have a look at that. So this isn't necessarily how it has to look. So if I do that, and you can see that's drawing that up for me. If I go to my normal selection tool and I click on this, you can see this is a path, so it's not a shape, whereas our Blob Brush tool gave us a filled in shape. This literally gives us a line. So one of the benefits of that is that all of the things that you normally do with a line apply. So you can change the thickness of it. So if you're not happy, you can change the thickness of it. Whereas with the Blob Brush tool, you probably have to go back and start again. We can curve off our edges like that. So we can go for a more sort of softer looking feel. Or we can choose one of our options on there. So you can see we can go to our profiles, our line profiles, and we can edit the profile of our line. Now, you might want to look at doing this per line. So if I show you these two here, I set that to that one, and I set that to the same one, then we can get them actually to join up. And again, I can go back through my paths and my anchor points and get those to look like they're joining up. So you might want to do this a line at a time. So it's really understanding, well, do I want that to be thin at that end? Well, probably not. I probably actually want that to be thicker at that end. So if I need to go back to my normal tool, select that line and go to that one, I want it to be thicker there. Now, if I'm not happy with that, I can flip that. So if I go into my properties here, you can see I've got an option here, so I can make it thicker at that end or thicker at that end. So it does give you maybe a little bit more control actually afterwards to edit things how you want them to, whereas the blob brush is very much about how you set it up and what you do at the time. You can also, obviously, because these are strokes, you can go for your brushes, so you can use different brush effects. So if I go to my brushes panel, if I open that via window, brushes, and choose that one, you can see we get this pencil tool effect, whereas the blob brush doesn't let you use that. You have a flat line and that's it, basically. So you can see here we've got these sort of pencil tool effects. Obviously I could go through my library, open this artistic panel, and I can choose different ones, and you can see we get different things depending on what we choose, and they look different depending. So you get maybe a little bit more post-editing control with the pencil tool, but it can be quite difficult sometimes having to go through every single line and, you know, edit the way it works and how you want it to look and things like that. You can still edit lines if you're not happy with them using that sort of direct selection tool to go in and use the anchor points. So it's totally up to you which way you want to work, but really it's about which style do you like. So your key tools when doing line work in Illustrator are the pencil tool and the blob brush tool, and then it's up to you how you want to do it with shading and how you use those techniques.